Yeah. That's an unfortunate thing. Like, because I'm assuming it's not a positive.
It is not, unfortunately.
Does this also go with the theme of, again, like I don't want to just keep referring to music, to movies and video games, but I'll also refer to like, I'm not even joking, like actual documentaries I've watched, actual books I read on mainly like Vietnam, World War II, World War One, where it's like, the Thousand Yard Stare.
I heard of it.
Yeah, like so basically like a lot of these troops they come back home. There's no way to like soften it, but like they've gone through a lot of trauma. They're, whether you want to call it like PTSD or shell shock, although I think shell shock's pretty outdated. I think that's more from like Vietnam era.
Yeah.
So you don't I'm not going to push you to go too deep into it, but could you give us an idea of like what it's like on the surface? And not just your experience, but like what you see in your fellow troops or other veterans you meet time to time.
See, it's and I'm not gonna go into details about what I saw and what I went through over there, but just back in the States and just trying to leave Iraq behind and just being back in the States. And I've seen struggle, not only in myself, but in other veterans, in the sense that the military trains you to be tough, to be strong, and to be like the Rambo that you see in the movies. That he doesn't think about anything, just goes into fight, and that's the part which is, in my opinion, the hardest part of a soldier is to transition back to a civilian life once you're out of the service and not think the way you were trained to think, because
Yeah.
it you have to go through all that training that they put into your head, that you're a killing machine, that you are this, you're that, you hate the enemy, you're gonna make the enemy die for his flag, not you for yours, and all that. So it is hard to make that transition back into the civilian world, and that's when PTSD starts to hunt you every day and every night. And I believe one of the reasons why we have that's the common uh, factor right now affecting most of the veterans, call it Vietnam and Iraq, Afghanistan. It's that mentality that is ingrained in our brains, that we are soldiers, we are going to fight, we're going to kill, we're going to do this and that, and then transitioning back to being a regular Joe is almost impossible if you don't have the right, if you don't seek help and get the right professionals in your team.
Right. And I want to ask, when it comes to PTSD, and like for me, like when I think of like war, I think like real PTSD, because now these days everyone claims to have PTSD. Oh, my dad yelled at me, PTSD, or like the
Yeah.
exam was too hard, PTSD. But like I think real PTSD is reserved for like veterans, victims, like victims of like assault or bad houses, things like this. To me, that's real PTSD. When it comes to war and you're doing your tours of service for any army, do you think PTSD can be avoided if you're still expected to be on the front line fighting? Or
No.
it's like, no, it's you can't.
Impossible. Impossible. If you're in the front lines, it is impossible.
Mhm.
That's why I believe every veteran that's been to war has some type of PTSD at different levels, of course.
When they come back home, because like again, it's like you said, you're turned into a soldier, you're turned into a fighter. Some people would argue like you're turned into a killer, but I think that's too simplistic and like movie to say you turned into killer. You're basically turned into someone to follow orders. But is it fair to say they never really train you to turn it off?
They
It's
don't.
like we got you in the war, we used you up. Now it's time to go back and like we're just letting you go.
No, yeah, they don't. They really don't. And I think that there should be some type of program that allows veterans, before just putting them out on the street or even just letting them go from the service, to really work on that. There are some tools, but I don't think that's enough. What we have right now in place to really, and even if we did, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think there will be a full transition. You will still, because we have a saying in the military: once you're a soldier for life. And I do believe that, because some things that will never change, and even if you try, they just won't.
So it's something you have to kind of live with.
Yes, you have to learn. You have to readjust the way of thinking, and yeah, it is tricky. It's tricky. You have to go through a lot of therapy to finally understand what's going on in your brain and what's going on with your mind.
And I want to ask, like, do you feel like veterans, because this is a huge issue even here in Canada where I live, do you feel like veterans are getting the right help? And I'm asking this because if you look like, again, in media and stuff, when you think about homeless populations, you see a lot of them are veterans on the streets. They're either now drug addicts, they're alcoholics. You always hear them talk about their stories like, I can't sleep anymore. They can't be around balloons because if a balloon pops, it triggers something. And like for me, I think that's pretty sad that these guys gave away like the best years of their life and the chance of a healthy mindset for their country. And then like it appeared, you know more than me, but for me as the average Joe, it appears to me that like when they finally came back, we no longer cared about them. Like they did what we needed them to do, which was like fight in a war, and now they're back and they're just like a bad reminder of something we were all involved in, but only we, the guys who didn't fight, can escape the consequence.
Yeah, so it's sad that they're trying, but I don't think they're doing enough to take care of soldiers or veterans once we are out to service. There are, like you mentioned people in the streets being homeless and being drug addicts and all that, and that's just part of what we just talked about. PTSD and not being able to make the full transition, because you're still stuck somehow. Your mind's still stuck somewhere else, not in the present time and place. So if you don't have the courage, because we've been trying that, and I think this is the problem. What I'm about to say, that's a huge problem. That you mentioned that you get trained to go to war and to fight as a soldier, but when you come back, there's no one training you on how not to be a soldier anymore. And I believe there is help, but there's no way to fully transition to that. And it's sad to see fellow soldiers and veterans being a drug addict, being on the streets without a home. But in reality, there are so many programs out there that are willing to help. It's just many times we don't know about what's out there because it's not being advertised a lot like it should. Being put out there and see you are a veteran, you should do this, and that because there's this, and that. But I don't see that a lot on the TV. I don't see that on the news. So that's a problem. And another big problem is, since we're being trained to be tough, to be able to take pretty much anything and to be a hardcore and all that, like the Marines and Army, being a soldier. And we know we have a problem, but we don't want to seek help.
There's a stigma with it, like it's seen as like a
And
pussy
just,
thing to do, to
yeah,
be
and
older.
we have a saying, just suck it up and drive on.
Mhm.
And that type of mentality is what I believe has a lot of veterans out there without a home and doing drugs or just playing on the street.